Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something wild, how a single wrong turn by a driver and one fateful diplomatic spark basically ignited the deadliest global conflict the world had ever seen up to that point. We're going to map out the fast-moving puzzle pieces that literally rewired the entire globe. Let's get into it.
So, how does a single assassination on a random summer day in 1914 plunge the whole world into its deadliest conflict yet? It's really tempting to think a war just starts from one isolated event, right? But when we take a closer look at the map of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, we quickly realize that the groundwork for this massive global tragedy, it was laid down decades before anyone actually pulled a trigger.
Part 1. The European Powder Keg. Let's look at how the rise of aggressive nationalism really undermined the dominant powers of the 19th century and perfectly set the stage for absolute disaster.
Okay, so picture this. Fearing growing powers and intense colonial rivalries, Europe basically divided itself into this incredibly dangerous web of military alliances. Think of it like two heavily armed camps just staring each other down. On one side, you have the Triple Alliance. That's Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. And facing them is the Triple Entente, made up of France, the United Kingdom, and Russia. It was literally a giant tripwire. If one single nation stumbled into war, well, they were all going to be dragged down with them.
Part 2. The Spark and Escalation. All those decades of simmering political tension are about to just completely snap into outright war following one fateful day in Sarajevo.
The date is June 28, 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, he's the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife are assassinated by a Bosnian Serb nationalist. And man, this was the match striking the powder keg. It gave Austria-Hungary the exact excuse it had been desperately waiting for to officially accuse Serbia. And just like that, the fuse of global conflict is lit.
What happens next is a genuinely terrifying domino effect. Within mere days, and I mean days, not months, the major powers dragged each other right into the abyss. First, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. Then, Russia steps in to defend Serbia by mobilizing its troops. In response, Germany launches its Schlieffen Plan, trying to pull off a surprise attack on France by marching straight through neutral Belgium. But that violation of neutrality, that forces the United Kingdom to declare war on Germany. Just like that. Boom. All the major European powers are at war.
Part 3. A deadlocked total war. That rapid German advance actually fails, and the Western Front completely freezes into 700 kilometers of muddy trenches, stretching all the way from the North Sea down to the Swiss border. With the front completely gridlocked, military tactics had to shift into a terrifying new reality: total war. Suddenly, the lines between a soldier on the front and a civilian at home completely vanished. Entire populations were thrust into the war effort. Women took on absolutely vital roles in arms factories, and massive reinforcements of recruits were drawn from global colonies all over the world just to fight and die on the front lines. This concept of total war birthed an era of terrifying industrialized warfare and just immense civilian tragedy. The technological leaps alone were devastating. You had the British Royal Navy enforcing strict naval blockades, while German submarines sank ships left and right. Zeppelin airships are dropping bombs on Paris and England, and lethal poison gas is filling the trenches. Meanwhile, over in the Caucasus, the Ottoman Empire accused the Armenian population of supporting Russia. This led to retaliatory massacres where more than half the Armenian population was killed. It's an event that 32 countries today officially recognize as genocide, while Turkey does not. The next few years were just defined by brutal stagnation. In 1915, the sinking of the Lusitania by a German submarine shocked the entire globe, killing 1,200 civilians, including 128 Americans. Fast forward to 1916, and millions are perishing in the mud during massive, deadlocked offensives at places like Verdun and the Somme, and this was for almost zero strategic gain. By 1917, exhausted and starving populations were at their absolute breaking point. Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare eventually forced a previously neutral US to jump into the fight, right around the same time Russia was facing an absolute internal collapse and revolution. Part 4. Empires fall, treaties signed. The relentless starvation, the massive debt, and just the sheer crushing exhaustion of total war finally began to crack the foundations of ancient, massive empires.
So, the end didn't come from one big battle, but through a series of dramatic structural collapses. First up, the Bolsheviks seize power in Russia and exit the war entirely. Now, this allows Germany to focus everything on the Western Front for one last massive push. But that final offensive completely fails against powerful Allied counterattacks. Back in Germany, sailors start mutinying, which sparks popular revolts across the country. The Kaiser is forced to abdicate, and the new government finally signs an armistice on November 11, 1918. Exactly 5 years to the day after the Sarajevo assassination, the victors met in Paris. On June 28, 1919, the victorious powers forced a severely weakened Germany to sign a highly punitive peace treaty in Versailles. And get this, they made them do it in the very same room where the German Empire was originally proclaimed decades earlier. Talk about sending a message.
The measures imposed on Germany were unbelievably severe. The treaty stripped Germany of 20% of its territory and 10% of its entire population, which heavily benefited a newly recreated Poland. On top of that, it demanded massive financial reparations, completely dismantled the German military, and forced Germany to accept sole responsibility for all the war damages. As you can imagine, this was a deeply, deeply humiliating blow to the German people. Meanwhile, the entire map of Europe and the Middle East was completely redrawn. Austria-Hungary was utterly dismantled, splintering into brand new nations like Czechoslovakia. The Ottoman Empire was similarly dismembered under some heavily disputed treaties, which actually sparked Turkish resistance that eventually forged modern Turkey's borders. And the Russian Empire, completely exhausted by civil war and massive territory loss, transformed into the USSR.
Part 5. The bitter aftermath. The guns finally fell silent on the Western and Eastern fronts, but the world that emerged from the smoke, it was heavily indebted and deeply, deeply unsettled.
We really need to pause here and let this staggering number sink in. 18 million. Just under 18 million lives lost. And 8 million of those, they were civilians. Take a second to really grasp that unprecedented, devastating human cost. It's almost hard to wrap your head around.
Geopolitically, the aftermath created an entirely new world order. The United States officially stepped up as the premier global economic power, while the Soviet Union was firmly established. Over in the Middle East, deep demographic and political tensions began mounting in Palestine following British wartime promises, and honestly, those are tensions that still dominate our global news cycle today. Oh, and as if a world war wasn't enough, this entirely weakened global population was immediately hit by the incredibly deadly Spanish flu pandemic. Just a brutal string of events.
Ultimately, the harsh redrawing of borders left millions of displaced populations, like German populations suddenly living in Poland and Czechoslovakia, and created a deeply resentful, economically crippled Germany. It really forces us to ask, did the resolution of this Great War actually bring about peace? Or did it merely set the stage for an even darker, more destructive chapter just over the horizon? Keep that thought with you.